Hey guys, welcome to the MSG Arena Meta Preview. I am ADWCTA and I'm with the Grinning Goat along with Merps. Merps won't be joining us for this video, but he'll be here for the later videos when we actually delve deep into like a card by card analysis and tier list valuations. For now, we're doing the meta analysis. I am a Infinite Arena player since open beta. And I've written bunches of guides and other stuff. We have videos. You're on this YouTube channel probably because you watch our arena co-ops or our 12-win runs. So we have a lot of experience with arena and with the changing meta. We also have a tier list at thelightforge.com, which we keep updated across all the metas for where we value the cards. And we'll get more into the tier list stuff in a future video. But for this part one, this is the bulk of the meta analysis. This means that when MSG hits the shelves, when it gets downloaded on December 1st or December 2nd, depending on which region you're in, the entire meta of the arena will change. Because MSG cards will enter the meta, and they will have an offering bonus. Since TGT, Blizzard has put an offering bonus on every single expansion set that has come out. And what that means is that you will see these cards much more frequently than you will see all the other cards. So while, Soulfire, for example, or Flamestrike are class cards, and they're usually offered at double the rates that common cards are offered at. If you have a class card that is also a MSG card, it'll be offered at 4 times the rate of like a Yeti or something like that. The plus 100% number that I'm using is from CURVESTONE, and since they started in TGT at like 25%, I think, they've bumped it up every single time. It was 25% for TGT, then it was 50% for LOE, then it was 50% again for OG because it was a big set. And then for CURVESTONE, it was 100%. At least. It may be a little higher than 100% actually. But whatever the offering percentage is, I really don't think there's a way that it will be lower. So for now, the assumptions that we are using is that the offering bonus for MSG cards is plus 100%. So that means you will be offered 2 of them for every regular card that you're offered, your normal class cards, right? Like you'll be offered 2 0 mana freezes for Mage, which is a new card in MSG, for every 1 Flamestrike you're offered. And that obviously has a huge effect on the arena. So what we're doing is we're analyzing what the new arena will bring, right? Because all the new cards are coming in, they're all going to be offered at such a high rate, the entire meta will change. One thing that, if you get ahead of the game, you get a lot of wins in the beginning, right? Like whenever the meta changes, the good arena players all come in and just like rack up 12 wins after the other, like every arena streamer. It's kind of interesting to watch. The competition's lower, and also there's an adjustment period, right? And there are metas in which you don't adjust to as well as others, but generally speaking, good players will adjust to new metas, especially players who have adjusted to several metas already. And this is kind of a guide for where the meta is going. The arena, unlike Constructed, is very predictable. In Constructed, like any one deck coming in or out of the meta will affect everything else, and we'll have this huge snowball effect, right? Like of this deck beats that deck. When that deck becomes less played, this deck is less good. That's not the case in the arena. In arena, it's just a bunch of cards, right? When you know what cards are in the arena, you know what the arena meta is going to be like, and that's what we do. We tell you, we figure it out, and then we tell you where the meta is going, so you can prepare for it. Now, one thing I will note is that, like, if you remember what happened when CURVESTONE was released, all of a sudden everything was different, right? It went from the OG slow taunt-based meta to this, like, turn 7 Firelands Portal or die meta. Mages all of a sudden were everywhere rather than almost everywhere. And it was just a very stark difference. And that was because they reduced the OG offering bonus to 0 when they released CURVESTONE. And then, at the end of the CURVESTONE release period, they added a CURVESTONE bonus of plus 100%. So it was all sorts of changes going on there, which is why it was such a big impact. MSG will not feel as stark when it comes to the offering bonus, because in the middle of Karazhan, if you didn't know this, they made a patch to the arena where they took away the offering bonus for Karazhan. So we've actually been in what I'm going to call the base meta, which just means no offering bonus on anything. It's just the normal arena. All cards are treated equal. It is the base meta. So we've been in the base meta now with all the cards that are available in the arena for the last like 1.5 months, maybe 2 months. And that means that rather than going from OG to Karazhan, where you get rid of the OG bonus and you bring in Karazhan cards and then you add a Karazhan bonus, this is going to be much smoother and much neater. You're just going to add a bunch of cards and give it a flat bonus. That's it. That's all that's happening. So with that in mind, there's also a larger card pool than there used to be, right? The impact is smaller every time. That's why they keep raising the bonus. So with that in mind, let's move on to some of the observations that I've made about the upcoming meta. So one of the first things that you'll notice when December 1st hits and the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan expansion is released is that your curve is gone. And I don't mean that your whole curve is gone. Like if you look at the neutral cards, right? Because what controls the curve? What controls the curve are neutral cards. Neutral cards are offered to every class, and so if you just like take all the neutral curve cards away, you're not going to curve out a lot. And if you stick a bunch of curve cards in, you are going to curve out. So in MSG, your curve is actually kind of normal-ish, but it's very tilted. It's not like an evenly distributed curve. A little over 50% of cards can be played on curve and like not be awful in MSG, which is pretty good compared to OG, which is at 46%, and Karazhan, which was at 44%. But it's nothing compared to like the good old days of like GVG at 73% or TGT at 59%. It's still going to, like, generally speaking, in the aggregate be okay. But that's not how you're going to feel it, because all of the curves are centered around 3 and 4. Now, I'll show you what I mean. There's this huge glut of common neutrals at 4, right? You have Daring Reporter. And these are, the worst part about this is that they're not like great curve cards. They're curve cards in the sense that you can play them on curve and it's okay. They're not Yetis, right? They're not spider tanks. Like Daring Reporter, right? Whenever your opponent draws a card, gain +1/+1. You play it, it's a 4/4, it's okay. It only becomes a 5/5 on your opponent's next turn, so even when you get it back, you can't like kill a Yeti with it or anything like that. You have to just kind of go face and wait for your opponent to deal with it. Like, is it a 4-drop? Yeah, you're not terribly upset if you play it on turn 4, but you know, you'd rather play a Yeti. You have like Hosen Healer, which is a 4-mana 2/6, restore a minion to full health, which operates kind of like an Earthen Ring Farseer. Are you okay playing Earthen Ring Farseer on turn 3? Sure, you're okay with it, but you're not like ecstatic. These are not premium drops. Even if these are good cards, and some of these are decently good cards, they're not all like trash cards or anything like that. Like, they're totally playable. They're not premium. Kooky Chemist, 4-mana 4/4. You swap the attack and health on a minion, which, depending on how the board looks, it could be like a Dark Iron Dwarf. But like a Dark Iron Dwarf, it's not exactly incredible on curve all the time. You have a Tenaris Hog Chopper, which is just a 4-mana 4/4 period, and then a Naga Corsair, which is a legit like Lost Tall Strider kind of effect. So that's like an okay 4-drop actually. And finally, you have a Worgen Greaser, which is a 6/3. Kind of reminds you of like a Ice Rager, right? 3-mana 5/2 instead of 4-mana 6/3. Are you okay with an Ice Rager on turn 3? Yeah, I mean, you're okay. You're not like incredibly happy, right? It's not premium. You're not going to be able to eat a lower drop and then also trade up the next turn. You can't do that with these cards. They just kind of trade with whatever's on the board and they die. So that's all the 4-drops. And that's all the 4-mana neutral cards. And they're all sort of functioning as drops, but they're not good. So you have this huge glut of like okay-ish 4s being injected back into the meta, which is not a bad thing, because we have been having kind of a shortage of 4s. In Classic, there used to be a ton of 4-mana cards that you could play on curve and be okay. And since then, they haven't printed it as frequently as all the other cards, like 3s and 5s and 2s. And so 4s have actually been contracting, so this is fine. But with all these 4s, it means there's no room for other stuff, right? There's also some 3s. You have 2 pretty premium 3s as far as neutral cards go. Toxic Sewer Ooze, 4-mana, 3-mana 4/3, has a Seek Swamp Ooze effect, and also Higher Gun, 3-mana 4/3 Taunt. These are all better than your average 3-drop. And 3 drops are better than your average card. So these are pretty good cards. And you'll definitely take these and you'll be okay with these. But what this expansion does not have are the prime stat distributions to be played on curve. You don't have 3/4s, you don't have 4/5s, you don't have 5/6s, like none of that stuff. So your curve quality is just going to suffer, even if the numbers look like they're good, right? So that's the first point. Everybody's curve quality is going to suffer, which means all the premium curve cards are going to be a little more valuable. Like, if you can match a 3/4 onto your opponent's 2/3, that's going to be pretty good. And if you also notice, both of the premium 3 neutral 3s are 4/3s. What does that mean? It means 3/2s are a little more valuable, right? Because now you have, like, if you just look at the tier list and you, like, or you just look at a card collection and you see what 3-mana common cards there are, you have a whole ton of 4/3s now, like commons and rares. A whole ton of 4/3s. And how many 3/4s do you have? You just have that one. You just have that spider tank. So the meta is definitely shifting in favor of 4/3s in terms of frequency that you see them. So that's one thing to note. And the other thing is that this is the expansion that has the absolute least 2-drops for a large expansion. OG only had 2 neutral 2-drops. And when that first came out, everyone noticed that it was much harder to curve out on 2. It didn't matter as much because the whole meta was so slow, but it was still kind of jarring. And then when the Karazhan meta came in, and the Karazhan meta had only like 1 2-drop, it was very stark, right? Like, no one curved out. All of a sudden, we raised 2-drops by like 6 points on the tier list. Like, it was Armageddon for 2-drops. This expansion is not going to help. For a large expansion to have only 1 2-drop, it means the curve is going to really suck at 2. So get to know your friendly bartender, which is the only 2-drop that's available. Only 2-drop neutral common 2-drop, or rare either. I don't think there's a rare 2-drop either. Yeah, there's no rare 2-drop either. So it's the only common or rare 2-mana card you can play on curve. So get used to him. He's not bad. He's actually one of the best common cards. I'm sorry, one of the best neutral cards in this entire set. The Restore 1 Health to your hero is deceptively useful. And 2-drops usually don't do a lot anyway. So he's definitely not bad, but he's just one guy. And even with an offering bonus, all these other cards are going to get so much more offering bonus. And you're going to be hurting for 2s. You were already kind of hurting for 2s. You're going to really be hurting for 2s. And that's something to really take into consideration. Your curve is going to be weaker in general because of all these okay-ish but not really very good curve cards that they're introducing, and you're not going to have 2s. So one thing about not having 2s is that classes that have 2-drops with an offering bonus are going to be very, very valuable. So which classes in MSG have a 2-drop? As it turns out, really, like, nothing. Hunter has a rare 2-drop and has a common 1-drop. So that's something, and it's good that it's Hunter because they kind of need it. Mage has a common 1-drop, sort of. That's not that good. There's no other really common 2-drops to speak of for any of the classes. Priest gets that 3-drop, but again, right, like 3-drops are not really what we need. We have 2 pretty premium 3-drops that are coming in the common neutral slot. What we need are 2s. Rogue gets the closest. 1, because Rogue doesn't need 2s. It has that hero power that you can just dagger and forget about it. And 2, it has Jade Swarmer, which is something you could play on turn 2, and it'll be probably as good as a dagger. So it's definitely like a playable card on turn 2. And Rogue also has a rare 2-drop, the Gadgetzan Ferryman. So I know there's a lot of people memeing about it for Constructed and how useless it is. In the arena, it's not bad, right? It's an optional brew that you don't have to trigger if you don't want to, and it's a 2-drop, so it's going to have an impact. Jade Claws for Shaman gets some extra value. It's a 2-mana weapon that you can play. It does overload for 1, so it's technically not a 2-drop. You have to play another 2-mana card the next turn, but it's better than nothing. And that's it, right? You notice that there weren't like really any common 2-drops at all, even in the class cards. So you have 1 2-drop in the whole neutral set, no 2-drops in the class sets, pretty much, except for a few classes who have like a rare, which is not a common. That is, like, we haven't seen a large expansion. I'm just going to hammer this point home again. We have not seen a large expansion that had as few 2-drops. Not even that had double this many 2-drops. OG was the closest, and if you factor in all the class 2-drops that existed in OG, OG basically had triple the amount of 2-drops. And you consider the, OG basically had triple the amount of 2-drops overall. That's crazy, because OG crashed the 2-drop market a bit, and Karazhan crashed it even more. So now we're going to be in an area where all 2-mana cards are premium. We did a Lightforge podcast when Karazhan was first released, and they took away the OG bonus, and it was just very stark by like week 2, and definitely by week 3, that there was just no 2-drops. And when there were no 2-drops, I had one rule whenever I was drafting any class besides Rogue: pick 2s. Whenever there's a 2, I pick it. Why? Because I can't play this game, especially if you have a class that needs the board, without a curve. And not having a curve becomes a very real possibility if you don't pick the early 2-mana cards. When your consistency for 2-drop goes down, that means the RNG also kicks up, right? Because now you need to draw your like 3 or 4 2-drops, and it's just not as smooth. So this is definitely a concern that I have with MSG, and you should be wary about it when you're drafting. So think about the 2s. It also means we're closing the distance again between 2-drops and 4-drops. So the tier list got a little bit of a makeover throughout Karazhan as we moved into a scale from... so there's now an absolute 0. It's centered on 50. The distance between any 2 numbers is the exact same throughout the entire tier list now. So like a 76 to a 78 is the same as like a 32 to a 34. And that did not used to be the case exactly. So now it's like pretty scientifically done with our overlay, and all the assumptions are like there's a back end to it, and so there's odd numbers. It just got a lot of upgrades, and it's a lot more precise now. So in doing that, and in looking into this new meta, we've raised Bloodfen Raptors and River Crocs and all like base 2-drops, right? Neutral, vanilla 2-drops to a 53. So we're closing the distance yet again. Yeti's at 56, by the way. It's just getting a bit closer again. It seems like every expansion that comes out, the distance between a 2-drop and a Yeti just closes a bit more. And this is no exception. So that's the first point. And I want to emphasize it again. 2-drops. A lot of 2-drops. Pick them. And on the other side, don't pick as many 3 or 4-drops because you'll be fine there. Okay, so the other theme that MSG is going to bring upon us is that there's no big theme, right? OG had Bog Creeper and Cyclotron, and they anchored this like taunt meta because they're common neutrals and they were really good. GVG had like piloted Shredders that anchored the meta because it helped you get on the board, stay on the board, it was difficult to remove, and it anchored that kind of aggro style, aggressive tempo style. TGT had a lot of Inspire cards that anchored the snowball mechanic, including some that were really overpowered in certain classes, like Mookless Champion in Shaman or in Paladin, for example. And it also had Kraken, which at that point, like when Kraken came out, for those of you who remember that far back, when Kraken came out, almost nobody except for me thought Kraken was going to be a great card, because up until that point, 9-mana cards were all worthless, because the meta did not get to that point. But TGT brought the meta to the slow point that we're now more used to in terms of the speed. And that's what made Kraken viable. So every large expansion so far has had these anchor neutral commons that really shape the arena, right? This is going to be the first one that doesn't have it. So what's going to shape the arena is not going to be neutral cards, but it's going to be these gangs, right? These class cards from these gangs and these new mechanics that each gang has. And that's kind of how Blizzard intended it. So it's a different way to feel. It'll feel a little disorganized, I think, when the arena first starts, because you won't be able to do what you did before, which is to identify like, oh, everyone's going to be playing slow because everybody has Bog Creeper, right? Or everyone's going to tempo on the board and be really sticky because everyone has piloted Shredders. or everyone is going to have this giant like North Sea Kraken in their deck, so they're going to play until turn 9 still matters. That's not going to be the case. In fact, the 3 gangs are going to be very different in terms of how they approach the game, and so there will be a lot of diversity, and we'll go into that right now. But because diversity, it's fun, but it also causes something that I haven't harped on for like about 6 months now, because it hasn't been as big of a deal as it was before, but it used to be a big problem in the arena, and that's RPS, rock, paper, scissors. You never want to get to a point where if you have a deck and it's rock, and your opponent has a deck and that's paper, you lose. I understand this is like all of Constructed, but this is why I don't like playing Constructed, because it's so much rock, paper, scissors. And Arena had a lot of skill involved in it. It's like on the board, minion on minion combat. You can eke out wins even if your deck is disadvantaged, which is why people can win like, 75% win rate regularly using like all the classes. It's because there's a lot less rock, paper, scissors. But when you move the decks away from each other, when you give each deck a mechanic that counters another mechanic, you're creating more and reinforcing more of this rock, paper, scissors system, which I'm worried about. And I'll show you what I mean. Like, Cabals, and in this case, it's even worse, right? When there's like a lot of rocks, because then the few papers are going to be really cool, and the few scissors are going to suck. And that's not very healthy for class balance. So anyway, they've kind of set up the system where the Cabal have all these board clears, right? That's their thing. They have board clears, they have removals in potion form, but it's not a real mechanic. They just took the 3 classes that had the most board clears, and these are the only 3 classes that have like multiple board clears, full board clears that deal more than 2 damage. Those are the only 3 classes. And it's mage, it's warlock, it's priest, and they gave them more like board clears to reinforce that archetype, and that's fine. And that's obviously good against aggro, and that's good against mid range because some of the board clears they got are pretty big. So the next mechanic is Jade. Jade is good at killing mid range and control because the Jade mechanic gets you progressive tempo. Like I call it accelerating tempo. I know you guys may have seen the Frodan stream where they revealed all the cards and he played like this like amazing like Jade deck that just snowballed out of control, right? It's not really going to happen in the arena, but Jade will still be very powerful. You're not going to get like 10-10 Jade Golems in the arena, but you could get like 3-3-4-4 Jade Golems in the arena, and those are still pretty powerful as far as arena goes, right? They cause pretty big swings, and they have very little cost. Because the Jade cards, for the most part, at least in Rogue and Shaman, are going to be pretty good. So I like to call this this effect in the arena accelerating tempo. Like you don't really lose that tempo when you play it. You don't gain tempo, but you don't lose it either. You're pretty good, right? Like think of a card like Jade Lightning or whatever that Shaman card is. 4 mana, 4 damage, summon a Jade Golem. Right? That's about well statted. It's 4 mana for deal 4 damage and then a 1/1. Like, even if you had no other Jade synergies. Which is, like, okay, right? 4 mana, 4 damage is not that great, but 4 mana, 4 damage and a thing, that'll get it done. So you don't really lose tempo. It's still a good card. But then, as the game goes on, you gain little bits and little bits of more tempo. Every card that you play that summons a Jade Golem becomes a tempo-gaining card. And that's going to matter. Because card advantage-wise, they're going to be okay. They're going from medium cards to large cards. You're still not going to beat out something like a Sprint or like a Mage, right? Basically, a Jade mechanic allows you to equalize with Mage in terms of card advantage. It's not ideal if you're trying to win the card advantage game here. It just makes you competitive. But what you are really good at is you are really good at beating control. Because in the end, you're not necessarily losing on card advantage, and you're tempoing out way harder than your opponent. And that's how you will be able to beat out a control deck. So it's good at killing mid-range and control decks. And with mid-range, it's just faster tempo later on in the game, right? Because mid-range doesn't end the game until later. So that's what Jade's good at taking care of. And the Grimy Goons is this mid-game burst mechanic, because you buff your hand, but you need a hand to buff, so it can't be late game. And it's not early game, because when you're buffing your hand, you're anti-tempoing. So you're not aggro, you're not late game, you're in this like mid game or maybe even mid-late game kind of like burst where you get to like finally play all these cards that you've been buffing all this time. And so that's really good at killing aggro because you can create bigger targets that they can't quite break through. and you could create awkward targets, and you can buff your taunts, so you can like strategically pick what to buff sometimes. And it's really good against control because you can anti-tempo, right? Control is about removing your board. What is control going to do if you play a bunch of anti-tempo cards that buff your hand, and the next turn you play out a bunch of way oversized minions in one turn? Right? Like, the control is going to do nothing. They're going to flame strike but be unable to kill your minions. The turn before, they're going to need to put out a minion to your existing minion you can trade. It really screws with control. So this is the rock paper scissors system, and it seems like it may be kind of balanced when it comes to what they're good at killing in a vacuum, but it goes a little deeper than that. So the overall pace for Cabal. Think about what the Cabal is. The Cabal is Warlock, the Cabal is Priest, the Cabal is Mage. They're all very slow classes. Warlock wants to get on the board, keep trading on the board to use its hero power for the value. Priest wants to get on the board, buff its targets, heal its targets, and stay on the board and eventually win. Mage doesn't even have to play on the board, doesn't even need anything on the board. It can just hang out and outvalue you. That's how these classes are typically played. So these classes were very, very slow. And they got slower because they got more board clears and removal. Well, Mage got kind of nothing, but the other two classes at least got stronger, but in a more controlled fashion, because they got buffs and they got removals. Now, Jade also wants slow, because if you have a very quick game, your Jade stuff doesn't quite get to build up, right? So you don't want like to be, end game top decking levels of slow with Jade, but you also are not going to aggro it out. So it's not endgame slow, but it's still pretty slow. You need to play enough. You need to draw and play enough Jade cards to kind of get those Jade Golems up. If you just keep having like 2/2 and 3/3 Jade Golems, it's okay, but it's not like game winning. When you have 4/4 and 5/5 Jade Golems, now we're getting a little like tempo heavy in an area that no one's going to keep up with you in the arena. And the goons want a medium speed. We've talked about the goons. That's the only speed this mechanic can play at successfully in the arena. So the important part here is that none of them are fast, right? Like, all three factions need to anti-tempo in order to take advantage of any of their MSG cards. And with the offering bonus, they're going to want to use their MSG cards. So we're at the point where everything is slow. And this is a weird way to do it, because you can look at the cards, and not all of them look slow, right? The Cabal is obviously slow, but the goons don't really look that slow, and the Jade mechanic doesn't really look so. It looks fast, if anything. But they are going to be slower than what you're used to in the arena. So things are going to move back like a turn or two on average. And when you start moving things back a turn or two on average, because you have to anti-tempo, you're going to lose the board. Or you're going to be more in risk of losing the board, both sides. And when you have crappy drops, right? When you have insufficient 2 drops and or crappy non-ideal 4 drops, you're going to lose the board more often. The board is more flexible for whoever actually does curve out. And who's good at curving out? Who, if you let them stay on the board, if you can't deal with what they put on the board, if they draft cards that focus on being on the board, can you not deal with? Priest? Warlock. So Cabal is not only the slowest of the three, at least for Priest and Warlock, it's also the one that can take advantage the most of the weaknesses inherent in the overall meta. That's a pretty dangerous combination, especially with something like Priest, which also got ridiculously amounts of like high value cards, and with that hero power that snowballs out of control anyway if you just like give it the board. Now you're in a meta in which the board is very inconsistently held in the first 4 turns. The whole like Spider Tank into Yeti into Pit Fighter will just not happen anymore. And so you will see a very different configuration of a mid-game board as people are more tempted and have cards to anti-tempo and try to regain the board later. So at the same time that that you're giving Priest and Warlock the board, you are also better equipped to take back the board, but it's really hard against those classes. On the other hand, if, for example, you give the board to like a Druid, what's the Druid going to do? Right? Like nothing. But you give the board to the Priest, you give the board to the Warlock, to the Paladin, they can do things with it. They can out-tempo you even though you are saving up tempo, or even though you are trying to build up a Jade Golem, they can snowball out of control first. And if they snowball out of control first, you're screwed, right? So again, these are very like all-in kind of mechanics, but they're just the decks you're going to draft. Like if you curve out and your opponent doesn't curve out, one of you is going to win based on whether you succeed at your end game goals or whether they succeed at their goal of controlling you before they eventually come back and kill you. And so we're getting more into rock, paper, scissors, right? We're getting farther away from just like normal trading on the board, normal like, do I go face or do I like build up the board? Just these very normal base arena considerations are going to matter less. And what's going to matter more is deck construction and deck quality and who your opponent is. You could have a very good deck, but if you start facing the wrong gang, like many times in a row, it's not going to end well for you. Like your chances to win are going to be lower and your skill is going to have less to do with it. For what it's worth, I think the most skill-intensive mechanic is the Goons mechanic, just because it's a bit tricky to use. Jade is actually brainless. It seems like it's so exotic, but it's very just like, yeah, if you can use it, you play it, and then the next time you play it again. So Priest and Warlock are in. Hunter's in too, because Hunter can get very aggressive on you. And so if you're very late in the game, you may not get there, even if you have board clears, right? Like, what's the use of a 6 mana, 5 damage board clear when the Hunter already got 20 damage on your face? On the other hand, off the board play, like classes that can't really get on the board or don't really want to get on the board, like the Mage, they're punished because your opponents are going to be kind of conceding you the board some of the time. And when your opponent concedes you the board, you got to take advantage of it. Because if you don't take advantage of it, you're going to get screwed later on when they unleash their tempo on you, right? Like, Mage is not going to be able to keep up with Jade, or they'll barely keep up on card advantage and not be able to keep up on tempo. And they'll lose to mid-game bursts from the Goons who, like, hide on, like, right before turn 7, right? Like, right before turn 7, you play a lot of buff cards, and you don't care if they wipe your board or do whatever. The next turn, you put out these, like, giant things. It's pretty effective against the Mage. So you have a lot more like ways to deal with the Mage. And I think that's one of the considerations that Blizzard did in this expansion, right? Like some ways to control the Mage in the arena. And it kind of shows. Okay, so that's the other part. Rock, paper, scissors, right? Like that's the other theme that we're going to see. This is going to be a 3 gangs, rock, paper, scissor kind of meta. And there's not really much to do with it. Just kind of recognize that it's happening. And don't be too down on yourself if you make a deck and you're like, all right, if they concede me the board, I will win. And then you face a bunch of decks that happen to like curve out too, and then you lose. That happens, right? Or if you're a deck that's like, okay, if they concede me the board, I can't do anything with it because I have these like awkward cards, right? Like I've invested in these high risk, high reward kind of cards, and I'm going to try to control my opponent. And then they concede you the board to build their hand, right? Or to like build Jade Golems or whatever. You're like, they're gonna, kill me in the mid range, in the mid game before I can get my value in, and they'll always be on the board, and I couldn't take advantage of my opportunities. And that's just how your deck is built. That's one thing to kind of keep in mind. And now we're just going to end this with some cards, right? So if neutral cards are not going to define the meta, what's going to define the meta is class cards, and we'll get there. But I do want one more quick word about some neutral cards. We talked about Hired Gun, and we talked about the new Ascetic Swamp Boots at turn 3. Those are the 3 mana anchors. Those are your only premium drops that really exist. They're rated as 60 on the tier list, or they're going to be rated as 60 on the tier list, and they are actually the highest rated cards. The base, highest rated neutral cards, including rares, including epics, that this expansion has. The expansion just doesn't have good good common cards. They really just, good neutral cards. It really just doesn't. Like Hired Gun, it's a 4/3 taunt. Like, yeah, okay, we know it's good, but it's not exciting, and it's not like that amazingly good. It's not game-changingly good. They're at a 60. A Friendly Bartender's at a 59. So right next to it. Like, these are your best cards. It's kind of how the meta's going to be. There's no neutral trendsetters here. The one card that is also rated really high is a rare card. It's Bomb Squad. It's rated as 60. Remember, Yeti's a 56. So these are like significantly above a Yeti. Which means you're gonna pick them when you see them. Piloted Shredder is a 68. So they're definitely not as good as a Piloted Shredder. They're way below a Piloted Shredder. They're also below Dark Iron Dwarf, which is at 63. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the premium level MSG neutral cards are, which is not all that premium still, but better than a Yeti. Anyway, back to Bomb Squad. Bomb Squad is a rare card, and I'll tell you why this card is very important for the meta. For common cards, for neutral cards, every single class has them. So they really define what you play around, and they really define what works and what doesn't work. If you ever wondered why, like, 4 health sucks in the arena, like, you may have gotten that, like, birds are not really as good as a Yeti, and just things with 4 health are not as sturdy as things with 5 health. That used to be because no one could deal 5 damage. Period. But since then, we've introduced some, like, 5 damage cards, right? Like, Firelance Portal's a 5 damage card that was introduced, and in Mage, too, the most popular class. You had Shadow Strike introduced, which is 5 damage from Rogue, the second most popular class. I don't know, maybe Paladin's the second most popular, but still one of the more popular classes. And they're all, like, very good cards that are, like, almost always picked. And yet 5 health is still okay. It's not as premium as it used to be, but it still seems like you just feel a lot better at 5 health than 4 health. And why that is because 4 health is the only amount of health that premium neutral cards can remove. And there's a lot of them. Premium neutral cards, for whatever reason, Blizzard just made a lot of things that deal 4 damage. Start with Piloted Shredder. It's not a card you want to remove because then you give them tempo, so usually your opponent will have initiative on it coming through the next turn. How much damage does it deal? 4. Right? Jungle Panther is not really a premium card, but it's seen a lot. It's stealthed, so it just hangs out until your 4-drop drops. It deals 4 damage. More importantly, Argent Commander and Bomb Lobber are premiums. They're rare, but rares are only offered about half as often as commons, so it's not like they're never seen. Them together is basically like having a common neutral card, and they deal 4 damage, and they're very premium. You pretty much take them whenever you see them, like a Piloted Shredder. And then you have North Sea Kraken, which again is another premium card that deals 4 damage. Now, what premium neutral cards deal 3 damage? Nothing. Literally nothing. What deals 2 damage? Again, nothing. Like maybe Worgen? That's as close as you're going to get. Stormpike Commando, not really all that great of a card. You have your Storm, the charging 2/4 card. I forget the name. Stormwind Knight, right? Like, yeah, they exist, but they're just not very, like, they're not great cards, and there's not a lot of them. You can deal 1 damage in a lot of different ways, so that's the other damage that you can deal. And you definitely can't deal 5 damage. You have to do, like, Reckless Rocketeer to deal 5 damage, and that's not really a very well, like, valued card, right? 6 mana for 5 damage. You don't want to do that. That's, like, more of a reach card. So, this is the meta that has been warping everything so far, like, in terms of neutral cards. And we're going to break that right now, just a little bit, with this Bomb Squad card. It is a rare card. It's not a common card, unfortunately, but it deals 5 damage. And that means that in the neutral card category, it is now ahead of the curve when it comes to 3 and 2. You will see more people, because it's also like a pretty premium card. It's 60 rating. Like your Stormwind Knights and your Stormpike Commandos and your Worgen Infiltrators are not rated at 60. But Bomb Squad is. And so you're already beating out 3 damage. Because there's no 3 damage neutral cards. Except for Wolf Rider, again, right? Like, very low. And I would argue you're matching or beating out 2 damage already, just with 1 rare card. And especially with an offering bonus, that makes it the same as a regular common card. A regular common neutral card. So, just to reiterate, it may seem like it's just a rare card, it's just a one-off kind of thing, but the fact that it exists is going to heavily impact the meta. Because now every single class can deal 5 damage on top of whatever normal cards they can use to deal 5 damage if they can do that. So this is a big deal. This is going to put another dent, another crack into that 5 health is premium kind of like mentality that I think still persists a bit in the arena. And I think it's already misplaced. Like even in the Karazhan meta, 5 health wasn't as premium as people treated it as. And now I think people are going to very much overvalue that 5 health. because Bomb Squad exists now. Okay. So just don't sleep on Bomb Squad's effect on the meta. It's going to be impactful. Okay, so the last word I want to say about neutrals is that there are some cards that are good for certain classes, like very good for certain classes, better than a 60, but they're just certain classes, right? It's not like across the board. Like Doppelganger is insane for Paladins, right? Like we rated a 72 for Paladins. It generates like just so much extra value. It's rated a 64 for Hunter and Warriors, which, you know, even though they don't have that many goons like buffing hand cards, they buff them a lot, right? You get a hit on that, that's like so much more tempo whenever you want it. Like it's game winning. And that's all better than Hired Gun. It's better than Bomb Squad for these classes. And also Rogue. Rogue just like was totally serviced by these neutral cards in this expansion. You have Naga Corsair, which is insane for the Rogue, and Small Time Buccaneer. Again, they're like cards where you look at them, they are neutral, but the first thing you think is, oh, Rogue. Naga Corsair is going to be a 65. Small Time Buccaneer is going to be a 63. They're good, right? They're not Pilot Shredder level good, but they're definitely like around where like Dark Iron Dwarf is for the Rogue. Okay, so moving on to class cards. The thing I'm going to get out of the way is some classes got nothing. Like, just nothing. Like, Druid's got nothing. Not a single card for Druid is rated better than a Raptor. Mage has got nothing. Not a single card for Mage is rated better than a Yeti. The Goons also are not strong. Well, Warrior and Paladin are not strong. Hunters, I think, going to do okay for a different reason. But Warrior and Paladin, they just don't have high-value cards. Those cards are not that great. They're commons. And their rares are not that great either, except for one card. There's one card for Warrior and one card for Paladin. The Grim Street, the Grime Street Pawnbroker and the Grime Street Protector, respectively. They're kind of anchoring the Paladin and Warrior's viabilities, but that's not great. That's not going to do it. You need your whole mechanic to kind of work, and the mechanic is okay for the Paladin. You can see what it's trying to do, and it may end up being okay, but it's definitely not going to be powerful. And for the Warrior, it's going to do nothing. Like, that's not the Warrior's game plan. And on top of that, the Warrior didn't get very good cards with it. You have to, like, hit random combos, basically, as the Warrior to make the whole thing work. And I'm sure we all know, and we all remember, that Warrior's been getting just insanely good cards every single expansion. This is the expansion where it stops. This is the expansion where it totally stops. Even in Karazhan, right? They got Fool's Bane. Like, amazing card. They got nothing here. They have no commons that are up to the level of their best common in any of the prior 3 expansions. And that's going to hurt. Because remember, Warriors have the worst hero power. It is really hard to balance the Warrior. They are doing quite well in the current base meta without the offering bonuses. Quite well. Merps just got 3 12 wins in a row followed by a 10-win Warrior. Like 3 12-win Warriors back to back to back. Warriors are in a very good spot right now in the meta. But when MSG comes, it's falling like a rock. Because Warriors are always in danger. It's the opposite of Priest. If you bring Priest up just a little bit over the line, they're going to dominate the meta. On the other hand, for Warrior, as soon as you stop like giving them like flat out overpowered cards, they're going to just sink because of that hero power. And this also tells you, right? We have a Druid, a Mage, we were talking about Warrior, Paladin. There's no power creep here. There's no power creep here. In general, for this expansion, you have a lot of okay-ish cards, but we're not seeing like the raw power that some of these other expansions have brought, right? Like the neutral cards are like, the class cards for 4. I know I just said 4 with 3 fingers, but for 4 of the 9 classes are like just flat out bad. So this is going to be a problem. And when 2 of your 3 common class cards are bad and they have an offering bonus attached to them, you're just going to get crap decks. Like, there's no way around it. And that's the problem. That's going to be the biggest problem here. Like, if you look at the Warrior, for example, Grimy Gadgetzan, it's pretty good, but Public Defender is not, like, draftable. It's a shield bearer that sucks even more, right? And, like, I know a guy is, like, barely draftable. Discover a taunt minion for 1 mana? You're a Warrior. You don't want to anti-tempo. So now we're looking at the top cards, the top class cards, and these are all the class cards that exist in MSG that's above a 70. All the class cards that get rated above a 70. And I drew the line at 70 because remember, Pilot of Shredder is a 68. And that's as high as like neutral commons go. Zombie Chow is a 68 also. North Sea Kraken is a 68. These are just like your top premium level common neutral cards. So 70 seemed like the natural place to draw my line. And there's nine cards above 70, and I'll go over them. Cards that are valued more get picked more in the arena, and so you'll see them more often, and they'll impact the meta more often. I threw epics in there because it's fun, and I didn't want to leave them out, but they will not impact the arena as much. Anyway, let's start. Start from the top. Jade Claws is going to be the best card in this entire set in MSG. At least when the MSG bonus is there, right? So that means on release when we're in the MSG meta, when there is the plus 100% offering bonus. After the offering bonus goes away in like January or whenever Blizzard's going to do that, I don't know if this card's going to be like still the best card in the set, but at least for now, it definitely is the best card in the set. It's at an 87. It is the best Shaman card outside of Flame Tongue Totem of any rarity. It looks like it's a really amazing card, and it is a really amazing card. Like, even if Jade Golems didn't grow, this is better than a Stormforge Axe. The fact that you're buffing your next Jade Golem, or that if you play later on, you get a buff Jade Golem, is like, it's ridiculous. Potion of Madness is our number 2 card. I think this may surprise a lot of people, because Priest has another card on this list, obviously, and that's the card I think a lot of people focus on. But Potion of Madness is just insane value. Every time I try to look at it, every time I run the numbers, every time I try to like picture what the conditions in which I can use it at, it comes out to be very easily used and having a ridiculous effect, and filling in an area that priests need help on. It is the highest rated priest card of any rarity, and it is the highest rated priest card of any rarity by a mile, by like almost 10 points. Nothing else is even close. You may agree or disagree with that, but that's where we're starting it off at. I do think that this is going to be the card we lower. We have the most chance of lowering, but I want to start it off at this high rank because I want people to pick it, and it should be that good. Like, it should cost at least 2 mana, if not more. And then it would approximate a Shadow Madness. And Shadow Madnesses are really good. In fact, Shadow Madnesses are like a top 10 card for Priest, definitely. So you're going on that, you're improving it, and then you're reducing the mana by 1. It's insane. Moving on, we have Piranha Launcher, which is an epic hunter card. It's good. It looks like it's good. It's a hunter weapon. Hunter weapons are amazing. It can go face. It gives you beast. It kind of just does everything you want it to do. And that's going to be at an 80. But, you're not going to see it all that often. It is an epic card. And next, we're going to get into the first card. Well, besides Potion of Madness, which you'll see a lot because priests will be everywhere. You will also see this card everywhere, and that is because it is a rogue common card. It is the Jade Shuriken. And again, it may not be this high after the era of Jade dominance is over, after the MSG offering bonus goes away. But until that happens, Jade is going to be very good for Rogue and Shaman. And so you will see the Jade cards here. Jade Shuriken for Rogue is 2 damage, summon a Jade Golem with a combo for 2 mana. Even if it's a 1-1, right? It's pretty worth it. It's above average, even if it's a 1-1. It's like almost a Dark Bomb at that point, right? Value-wise. And it buffs future cards. It's the same thing with Jade Claws, right? But it's not as good as Jade Claws because it's not a weapon. And this is going to be the second highest common, right behind Backstab. So these are like very good cards. It's not like MSG doesn't have premium cards. They're just focused in just a few classes, and they're not premium, like, they're not blatantly overpowered, ruin the game kind of deals. Cabal Talon Priest is the other priest card, 76. That's next up on the list, and it would be the highest priest card if it were not for the Potion of Madness that we were talking about. So in one expansion, Priest got 2 cards that are going to be rated higher on this tier list than any card they have ever gotten before. Ever. If you think Blizzard is like focused on Priest in this expansion, yeah. Yeah, they are. The Mean Streets of Gadgetzan is the Priest expansion. And this is also why, when I saw these 2 cards at BlizzCon, I immediately tweeted out, I don't really care what the other cards are for the other classes. I'm pretty certain Priest is going to be number 1. And that's where the meta is going. Priest is going to be number 1. I think it may be tied with Rogue. Questionable, because this Jade mechanic is actually really good, also, when the offering bonus exists. But the Priest cards are just flat out overpowering everything else. Next is Jade Lightning, Shaman, 75. Not much to say about it. It's your good Jade removal for the Shaman, kind of on par with the Jade Shuriken for the Rogue, but not quite as good. Still very good. It will anchor down the whole mechanic in the Shaman. And this is the kind of card that Druid doesn't have, right? And because Druid doesn't have a premium like Jade anchor, their Jade mechanic doesn't really work that well, and so Druid's going to kind of suck. Next up, we have Grime Street Protector, our Paladin card, our Paladin Lawyer here, at 71. And you know how all the other cards that we went over were like, oh, this is like the highest Priest card, the second highest Priest card, the second highest common Rogue card. This is how overpowered Paladin cards are. Grime Street Protector on this list does not even crack the top 10. I'm going to say that again. It does not even crack the top 10 list of powerful Paladin cards. It comes in at number 11. I mean, look at the card. It's flat out overpowered, but not as overpowered as the other Paladin cards. So that's Grime Street Protector, and you get to use it whenever you have a board and you win the game. And if you don't have a board, you can probably come back onto the board with such a huge taunt and at least 1 Divine Shield on something, if not 2. After that is Dragonfire Potion for Priest. 3 Priest cards on this list. This one's epic, but still, it adds to the whole, like, the Priest can do weird things with like board removals, and they're all epic and rare, except for Holy Nova, and so you can't really predict it, and you just kind of have to hope and pray that the Priest doesn't screw you over. Like, it's bad. It's gonna be bad when the Priest dominates the meta. No one's gonna have fun. So that is something I'm very scared of. And you can see it, right? Like when we start going down the top cards, which so define a meta, especially a meta with no great neutral cards, you see what's happening. You see that the Priests have all these just way overpowered cards. You know that the Priest mechanic, we talked about this before, is very suitable for other people anti-tempoing in the early game. And then you also know, on top of all that, that the hero power, after the Priest is able to get on the board, goes from being a bad hero power, one of the worst, to the best hero power in the game. It's all going to come together for the Priest, and it's going to make everyone else's lives miserable. And you also see how the Jade mechanic is good, right? We already have 3 Jade cards in the top list so far. A Shaman Rare, a Shaman Common, and a Rogue Common. All right. The final card that's a 70 is the Abyssal Enforcer, which is the Warlock card. It is the 4th highest Warlock card after Doom and Shadowflame, which are both not common, and Gang Boss. So it's good. It's definitely meta-defining. You will play around this card against a Warlock, especially because they can also have Hellfire. But it's not quite like some people came out and was like, oh, best Warlock card. It's not quite that good, but it's still very good. And one last card that I just wanted to bring up. This card didn't get rated as high as I kind of would like to, but that's because it has a pretty big drawback. But it is going to change the meta enough that I want to talk about it in this piece. So it is the another Warlock card, and it is the Blast Crystal Potion, which is a common 4-mana card that says destroy a minion and one of your mana crystals. So it is a hard removal for Warlock. Warlock used to be one of the only classes with no hard removal. In the common, with no common hard removals. Even like Druid technically had naturalized, right? So it was just Warlock and Paladin. And that was it. And now Warlock is thankfully no longer on that list. one of the Warlock's biggest weaknesses was your opponent plays a big minion. Your normal response to it, if you don't have a hard removal, which Warlocks don't have except for Siphon Soul, which is rare or epic or something, you spread out on the board. But as the Warlock, if you spread out on the board, your opponent can go face. And if your opponent goes face, you lose all that valuable health that you need to hero power. So even if you don't die, you're not winning the card advantage war that way. So it is very difficult for Warlocks to deal with large minions. It is like their biggest weakness, and they are weaker to it than any other class. Because of how much their health is important, and how they can't just spread out and go face the way other classes can. Which is why also for Warlocks, small taunts are very good. So now you've kind of broken the Warlock, right? Like the Cabal Warlock has an Abyssal Enforcer for like an additional board clear on the common slots, and that's control because it also destroys your own board, and it has a Blast Crystal Potion that's a hard removal. And it's a hard removal that gets better the later in the game it is, because destroying your mana crystal doesn't matter too much on turn 8 and doesn't matter at all on like turn 10. So it does have the drawback. It is only a hard removal that is not horrible to play like past a certain turn. And sometimes you need to hard remove their like 5 mana drop, right? Or they play a 4 mana 7/7, you need to hard remove that. And you just can't do it with this without setting yourself way back. So it is penalized a lot. But it changes the way Warlock is played, and it changes the way you play against Warlock. So you can still drop those big things earlier on, but when it gets to around like turn 8, that it's no longer like a surefire thing, right? You have to take this card into consideration. And with the offering bonus, this card will be everywhere. It's still a good card. Like it's still like Yeti level or better, right? But it will be everywhere, and you will need to play around that when you're playing around the Warlock. Okay. That's it for the short kind of like top list of meta impacting cards, and this is the MSG meta. You have the Goons, who will play that mid-range burst game. You have the Jade, and when I say Goons, I really mostly mean Paladin, a little bit of Warrior and Hunter, but mostly Paladin. And when I say Jade, I mean Shaman and Rogue, not Druid. Druid might as well not have Jade; they just have such bad cards. Jade is going to keep up a normal tempo game, almost like the way normal arena works, except each card is going to get better, and they're just going to get like better and better cards as the Jade mechanic works on. And Cabal is, at least for Priest and Warlock, is just going to be frankly overpowered, because they are going to hit the meta at the right stride. Everything's going to work for them in terms of them being able to get on the board, and in terms of them having really high-powered cards, and in terms of your opponent's mechanics, like actively working to help you establish the board, and all the neutral cards actively working to make sure other people don't necessarily curve out. It's problematic, and I think you're going to see Priest and Warlock very high in the meta, with Priest being number 1, and Rogue will be somewhere there too, and Shaman will be somewhere there too. I'm very curious on how the Mage is going to survive this. Mage is not in like a bad spot, because it's hard with that hero power and all their existing cards to be in a bad spot, but I think it's a stretch to say that they're still going to be number 1. They may not even be top 3 anymore. Like we can very much see a meta in which Mage is not top 3. And Paladin also didn't get all that much power. So it's going to be like an upside down kind of meta, and it's going to be very interesting. So okay, just a quick recap. This is MSG. We are not going to have 2-drops, so take 2-drops. They're premium. We are going to be overloaded on 4s and 3s, so don't worry too much about getting your 4s and 3s, especially not 4s, when it comes to the curve. Your gangs are going to be pretty RPS, rock, paper, scissors, which means that you will draft certain decks that will just flat out lose to certain other decks, even if their decks are worse than you, regardless of how you're really playing it. The Jade mechanic is a drafting mechanic, because you just there's no playing skill to it. It's a drafting skill. You have to know how to value these cards. Obviously the Cabal mechanic is really just more board clears, and you know what to do with those. So these are not like difficult things to do when it comes to skill. They're really just rock, paper, scissors, right? Are you facing the right deck? And they push your archetype like to such extremes, especially with the offering bonus, that you're really going to get a lot of rock, paper, scissors. And so keep that in mind when you face certain decks, and keep that in mind when you're drafting. Of how much you want to play into the rock, paper, scissors mentality. Like, maybe pick some cards that will just kind of save your butt against a particular kind of deck. Because without it, your deck may be very good and you may be very skilled, but you will lose to that other deck otherwise, and you kind of want it out in that kind of sense. Everything's going to slow down. That's another thing, just because all these mechanics are anti-tempo. And I don't necessarily mean that instead of 15 turns, the game will take 17 turns. What I mean is that rather than curving out on 2, 3, 4, 5, you're instead going to purposefully anti-curve or just not be able to curve, and then kind of come back in the mid-game and play this like new mid-game like 9-10 mana-ish kind of like, you know, maybe even like 11-12 mana. The game is still raging kind of game. The game may still end in a similar fashion, because once you kind of like get your 5th Jade Golem, or once you played the cards that you have buffed for like the last like 3 turns, the game's kind of over, right? One way or the other. Like, they deal with it, you're done. They don't deal with it, you win. Again, rock, paper, scissors. That's the MSG meta. This is a meta not defined by neutral cards. This is a meta not defined by like a single overpowered card like Keeper of Oldemon or Murloc Knight or Shadow Strike or Firelands Portal. And note that those were never like the top cards, actually. They were just like very good cards that are very easy to use and that had an offering bonus and that were in popular classes. Like, there were better cards in each of those expansions. So that's it for me. The meta will be fresh. Enjoy the mean Streets of Gadgetzan. And the thing with this meta is that it'll likely only be here for 1 month. I think after the holidays, they're going to get rid of the offering bonus to MSG cards, and they're going to go back to the base arena with like all the cards. So it's going to be an exciting meta for 1 month. And this is technically part 1. This is the meta analysis part, right, where I'm actually like talking about the meta that's going to come in. And this is just the first video. So the videos going on after this will be reviewing the Lightforge tier list, the exact scores we give each card and why we do that and what card comparisons there are, as well as how to play those cards. And Merps will join me for that. And that'll be not unedited. It'll be like a freewheeling kind of discussion. And we'll break that up into parts, but like expect kind of like a long video, because this video was so nice and short. So definitely we are far from done. Stay tuned. Check back in. We're going to release all the other parts on the day of the expansion release, which is December 1st. So that is when we will release the other videos. Check this channel again when that date comes. It's youtube.com/ADWCTA. Huge shout out to Created, who edited this video, and shout out to Blizzard for making such a freaking interesting expansion. I've said, right, like, I have my doubts about how well this will work when it comes to balance, and I hate rock, paper, scissors, but it's gonna be fun. Like, because everything's gonna be shaken up, because these are like this whole new gang mechanic thing with 2 like very game-changing primary mechanics, and getting rid of the curve in favor of board clears. Like, it'll open the whole game up in weird ways. So that's it for me and this MSG Arena meta preview, but we are far from done. The meta will be so fresh because of all the new cards coming in. 2 new mechanics. We haven't gotten a new mechanic for like a year, and there's 2 new mechanics. And I have my doubts about like how well the balancing is going to work, and the rock, paper, scissors part. I hate rock, paper, scissors. But it's going to be definitely interesting to play. And we are not even done with this review series yet. This is part 1. It's the part focused on the meta. We are going to go down to the Lightforge tier list and have an extended tier list video series with Merps, where we talk about every single card. This is the first time we valued cards, and we talk about every single one and exactly why we rated it the way we did and what card comparisons we used. As well as we'll also give some more like class, gang, and card related commentary about how to use them and how to build a deck with them and where your synergies are. So that's not going to be an edited video. We're just going to like hit the record button, break it up into 4 pieces, and talk and try to talk fast. But that's going to come up. So check back on release date and make sure you watch those videos so you can hit the ground running when MSG comes out ahead of the curve and get those 12 wins. Until then, this is ADWCTA, and I hope you enjoyed this MSG Arena preview and hope to see you in the arena. See ya.